like to give a special thanks to Magic X Beats, produced this track. Proclaim your nationality. I never would have thought it would be this way, to proclaim my nationality. I got a birthright inheritance. Europeans don't want you to have an actuality. I never would have thought it would be this way, to proclaim my nationality.
Thank you for tuning into Wdrv Media, the voice of the community, the only station giving you double the information and inspiration. You are listening to What is Your Nationality? And I am your host, Shem L. I am the author of several books, including What is the Higher Self, which you can purchase on my website, shemel.com. That's SHEM-EL.com. Also, you can go on my website to join the 6-month mentorship program known as Trauma to Triumph Training, where we deal with generational trauma, racial trauma, and post-traumatic slave syndrome, where we deal with these topics to get back to the great status of the people who we were and are. So, I also want to make note that we are still on board for the first social and economic conference in Durham, North Carolina, on January 2022, towards the end of January. And we are still looking for a definitive date and venue. However, we still have those 2 confirmed speakers, and we are looking to have some more added on to the list. We will keep you posted as details develop. So, with that stated, today we are talking about a particular topic. I had been wanting to address this topic before, but we had so many other things come as of recently that I kind of put it to the back burner. And but it is, fortunately and unfortunately, it's a timeless topic. It's not dated. I mean, it's not, we're still dealing with the situation today. And the name of this particular episode is Justifiable Homicide, the Modern Day Casual Killing of Slaves. Again, is Justifiable Homicide, the Modern Day Casual Killing of Slaves. Now, this particular episode, I will actually be reading from an article. I'll be reading a couple of articles, but one main article that I will be reading from is an article that I actually wrote back in July 29th of 2014. I want you to keep in mind of this. July 29th of 2014, I wrote this article. And we're in 2021. So that's what? 7 years later? And it's still valid today. What I wrote in 2014 is still going on today. And the title of that article is the title of this episode, which is Justifiable Homicide, the Modern Day Casual Killing of Slaves. You can actually look this up. You literally can Google up Justifiable Homicide Slaves and it will pop up. There's an article I wrote, and it was first published on MooreAmericanNews.com. You can still find the article as of the time of this recording. And the reason I wanted to get into this was because some time ago recently, there was some news in pertaining to the killing of a young man by the name of Elijah Mclean. So they concluded an investigation on him. He was actually murdered in 2029, and I'll get into that. But in the article, numerous articles that came out some time ago, not too long ago, maybe about a month or so ago. The investigation concluded that the death of Elijah Mclean, by Aurora, Colorado police was racially biased. It was racially based, which is important to note, and I'll get into that as of later. But that being said, this is a tragic story that we hear far too often. And it's just always shocking the way you have certain people, and I spoke about it in earlier episodes, where they try to paint this narrative like as if racism doesn't exist, as if oppression doesn't exist anymore. We're like as if we're in a post-oppression, post-racial society, and that's couldn't be further from the truth. So we're going to go into that. But first, before we go into that, we're going to take a brief pause for the cause. But when we come back, we will continue our discussion. You are listening to What is Your Nationality? And I'm your host, Shem L. You are tuned into WDRB Media, the voice of the community, the only station giving you double the information and inspiration. We will be right back after the break.
If you want to educate, empower, and inspire our community, we're providing a wonderful opportunity for anyone who feels they can make a positive impact in the lives of others by applying to be an on-air radio personality. To set up an interview, call 877-342-7770. That's 877-342-7770 to apply. This is your chance to step out on faith. This is your chance to get the experience and education that you need in order to launch to the next level of greatness and make a significant difference. WDRB Media is now hiring on-air radio personalities. If this is you, no experience is required, no previous education needed. They do all the training. Call 877-342-7770 to set up your interview today.
Welcome back to WDRB Media, the voice of the community, and those streaming live through free TuneIn radio app and through iHeartRadio. You are listening to What is Your Nationality? And I'm your host, Shem L. I am the author of several books, including Land of the Free, which you can purchase on my website, sheml.com. That's SHEM-EL.com. Also on my website, you get the opportunity to join our 6-month mentorship program known as Trauma to Triumph Training, where we address generational trauma, racial trauma, and post-traumatic slave syndrome, where we deal with those issues to get back to the state of the great, glorious people who we truly are. Also, be on the lookout for the upcoming first Social and Economic Conference in Durham, North Carolina. You are all invited. We are set soon to get a specific date and time. It will be in the end of January, tentatively at the end of January 2022 in Durham, North Carolina. And we have locked in 2 confirmed presenters at that conference. There is set to be vendors. I've been meaning to say that vendors, food, refreshments, definitely. So you will definitely enjoy yourself, and we'll give you updates as details develop. So if you're just tuning in, we were discussing the subject matter of Elijah Mclean. The title of this particular episode is Justifiable Homicide, the modern day casual killing of slaves. Is justifiable homicide the modern day casual killing of slaves? And I mentioned that I wrote an article with that same title. But before I get into that article, I want to get into the subject matter of Elijah Mclean. So to give a background, brief background about Elijah Mclean. Elijah Mclean was a 20-year-old young man in Aurora, Colorado, who died after a violent police encounter. Okay, he was a young brother. He was known as a pacifist. He worked as a massage therapist at the time, just 23 years old. Just 23 years old, and was killed. And before I get into the details of that, what I want to do is get into the article, one of many articles that came out not too long ago. And this article was put out by USA Today. And the title of the article is this. It says, Police Department in Elijah Mclean's death found to be racially biased, use excessive force. Okay. So, to give some highlights of the actual story, and I'm reading from the actual article. It says here, story highlights. Elijah Mclean, a 23-year-old black man who was walking home from a store, died in 2020 after police and medics administered him ketamine. Now, actually, the records show that he died on, let me see, he died in 2019 to be correct, but it says 2020 here. Okay. And then it says his death and multiple police misconduct reports prompted the investigation into the Aurora Police and Fire Departments. The report found they violated law through racially biased policing, use of excessive force, and unlawfully administering ketamine. Okay. And then they say corrections and clarifications. A subline in this story has been updated to reflect that Aurora Fire Rescue illegally administered ketamine, according to the report. Okay. So it was the fire rescue department that administered the ketamine, and they administered it illegally. Now, here is the bulk of the crux of the article. It says, a civil rights investigation sparked by Elijah Mclean's death has found a pattern of racially biased policing and use of excessive force within the Aurora Police Department, Colorado Attorneys General announced Wednesday. The investigation into Aurora Police and Fire Departments determined that they violated state and federal law through racially biased policing, use of excessive force, failing to record community interactions, and unlawfully administering ketamine. Announced in August 2020 after multiple police misconduct reports, the investigation was prompted partially by the in-custody death of Elijah Mclean, a 23-year-old black man who was walking home from a store earlier this month. 5 police officers and medics were indicted by a Colorado grand jury in connection with his death. These actions are unacceptable. They hurt the people that law enforcement is entrusted to serve, Attorney General Phil Weiser said. Aurora Police Chief Vanessa Wilson said in a statement that the department will cooperate with Weiser's office and has already begun implementing reforms. Wilson acknowledged, quote, there are changes to be made, unquote, but said, quote, we will not broad brush this agency or discount the professionalism and integrity that individual officers bring to our community every day, end quote. State investigators conducted interviews, went on ride-alongs with officers and firefighters, and reviewed thousands of use of force reports. The 112-page report found Aurora police used force against people of color almost 2.5 times more than they did against white people. Nearly half the police officers used force against nearly half the people police officers used force against were black, while only 15% of Aurora's population is black, according to the report. I'm going to repeat that. Nearly half the people, that's 50%, nearly 50% that the officers used force against were black, while only 15% of Aurora's population is black, according to the report. Furthermore, Aurora police also arrested people of color 1.3 times more than white people. The disparity was even more pronounced for black people, who were arrested over 2 times more than white people. Quote, "We observe statistically significant racial disparities, especially with respect to black individuals, in nearly every important type of police contact with the community, from interactions to arrests to uses of force," end quote, the report said. All right. Okay. Now, the report includes multiple examples of police responding differently to people of color in comparison to white people. In one instance, a black man told police he had a knife and planned to kill himself. Officers responded by pointing their weapons at the man and yelling at him to comply. On the same day, a white man who was very drunk and exhibiting mental health issues threw his cane at officers, according to the report. The incident ended after an officer walked up to him, extended his hand, and said, "I'm you looking to be hurting. How can we help you?" Oh, I'm Joe. Okay. I'm sorry. I misread that wrong. Let me read that again. The incident ended in the officer walking up to him, extended his hand, and saying, "I'm Joe." Joe was in parentheses because Joe is, I guess they're using that to not give the name of the officer. "I'm such and such. You're looking to be hurting. How can we help you?" Okay. So he extended his hand out and said, "Hey, I'm Joe. You look to be hurting. How can we help you?" Okay. So they were empathetic to this man who was identified as white, but when it came to the man who was identified as classified as black, they pointed guns at him and yelled at him. Okay. Now, further, I'll continue on. Investigators found Aurora police regularly used, quote, "greater force than reasonably warranted," unquote, and observed officers using force without giving people adequate time to respond to officers' commands. They saw officers use force against people who had not committed any crimes or presented any danger, often generically reciting, quote, "stop resisting," end quote, even when the person was not resisting. Officers also escalated situations in which the subject showed, quote, "obvious mental distress," end quote, and did not, quote, "apply nonviolent means," end quote, before resorting to force, according to the report. The report also points to issues in the department's documentation and recruitment processes. Aurora officers often make stops without documenting them as the law requires, the report found. Investigators found only 1.1% of Black applicants who met minimum qualifications were offered a job with the department, as opposed to the 4.2% of white applicants. This level, now this is the quote, this level of racial winnowing can be observed at every step of the process, suggesting bias in Aurora's recruitment and hiring process, a Wednesday statement announcing the report findings said. Okay, reports find Aurora rescue illegally administered ketamine. The report also examined the department's use of ketamine in the wake of Mclean's death. In medical settings, ketamine is routinely used for its rapid and anesthesia effects, but it is also used illicitly as a hallucinogen. Aurora Fire suspended the use of ketamine last year as a part of a series of policy changes following the death of Mclean, who died in August 2019 after being thrown to the ground and put into a now banned carotid artery chokehold. So that was a chokehold placed against the carotid artery. Okay. Now, Aurora medics injected Mclean with 500 milligrams of ketamine, well over the maximum amount recommended for his weight. Mclean, a vegetarian massage therapist and violin player, choked on his own vomit and had a heart attack. He was declared brain dead at the hospital and died 6 days later. Police were responding to a 911 call that Mclean had worn a face mask into a convenience store to buy some iced tea. The caller reported that he looked suspicious and was Black. 5 police officers and medics indicted earlier this month faced charges including manslaughter and assault in connection to Mclean's death. The report found Aurora Fire Rescue administered ketamine and anesthetic 22 times between January 2019 and June 2020, despite a suspension of its use in September 2020. Okay. In more than half of these instances, paramedics didn't follow ketamine monitoring protocols and used the anesthesia at doses above maximums allowed based on the weight of the subject, the report found. Okay. City of Aurora investigation faults overall police treatment in the fatal arrest of Elijah Mclean. Attorney General urges policy changes. Elijah's mother, Shanine, urged the police department to make policy changes and work with the Attorney General's office following the release of the state investigation findings. It's just terrible that it takes my son's death for Aurora's police to change what they've been doing for a long time in this community, she said Wednesday. Front and center, Elijah would still be here if the system was operating like it should. My son's death was preventable. And it goes on to say, since Mclean's death, officers have been criticized for excessive force again. Last year, officers handcuffed 4 Black girls over a car that was suspected stolen, but turned out not to be. In July, an officer was charged with assault after pistol whipping and choking a Black man. The latest investigation is the first of its kind in the state following a Colorado police accountability law passed amid public outcry over Mclean's death and the murder of George Floyd. In the Wednesday statement, Weiser urged Aurora Police to reform its use of force policies and officer training, adding that if the department fails to comply with the recommendations made in the report, his office will seek a court order compelling them to do so. State Representative Leslie Herod applauded Weiser's recommendations. Quote, "We have affirmed what the citizens of Aurora and so many folks already knew, that the Aurora Police Department has operated in a way that is racist and that it is particularly racist against Black people and presents harm to our community," end quote, Herod said. And this is from the Associated Press, found in USA Today article. So that is the article. Now, in conclusion, I want to just read the last words of Elijah Mclean. This came from the body cam audio, okay? And it's really sad when you look at it. These are the last words to show you the type of man. He wasn't a threat at all. This is his words. He says, "I can't breathe. I have my ID here. My name is Elijah Mclean. That's my house. I was just going home. I'm an introvert. I'm just different. That's all. I'm so sorry. I have no gun. I don't do that stuff. I don't do any fighting. Why are you attacking me? I don't even kill flies. I don't eat meat. But I don't judge people. I don't judge people who do eat meat. Forgive me. All I was trying to do was become better. I will do it. I will do anything. Sacrifice my identity. I'll do it. You all are phenomenal. You are beautiful, and I love you. Try to forgive me. I'm a mood Gemini. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Ow, that really hurt. You are all very strong. Teamwork makes the dream work. Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to do that. I just can't breathe correctly." This young man was not a violent man. You understand? And you could tell that these are not the words of a criminal. These are not the words of someone who is out to harm anyone. It's really a sad thing, man. It's really a sad thing. And we're going to go into our next segment, how this has been going on and how it has been actually fortified in the law to do this, which a lot of people don't know. But before we get into that, we'll take a brief pause for the cause. After that, we will continue our discussion. You are listening to WDRB Media, the voice of the community, the only station giving you double the information and inspiration. Don't go anywhere because we'll be right back.
Check it out. Hi everyone. Be sure to connect with us on Facebook at WDRB Media and follow us on Instagram at WDRB Media Radio
for all your updates, information, and inspiration.
You're listening to WDRB Media, the voice of the community.
If you want to educate, empower, and inspire our community, we're providing a wonderful opportunity for anyone who feels they can make a positive impact in the lives of others by applying to be an on-air radio personality. To set up an interview, call 877-342-7770. That's 877-342-7770 to apply. This is your chance to step out on faith. This is your chance to get the experience and education that you need in order to launch to the next level of greatness and make a significant difference. WDRB Media is now hiring on-air radio personalities. If this is you, no experience is required, no previous education needed. They do all the training. Call 877-342-7770 to set up your interview today.
Welcome back to Wdrv Media, the voice of the community, and those streaming live through free TuneIn Radio app and through iHeartRadio. You are listening to What is Your Nationality? And I am your host, Shem L. I'm the author of several books, including What is the Devil Sometimes Called, which you can purchase on my website, sheml.com. That's SHEM-EL.com. You also get an opportunity on the website to to enroll and join our 6-month mentorship program entitled Trauma to Triumph Training, which deals with generational trauma, racial trauma, as well as post-traumatic slave syndrome, where we deal with those issues and tackle them so we can get back to the state of the great people who we truly are. So, if you are just tuning in, we are discussing the aspect of police brutality, police killings, and the title of this particular episode is Justifiable Homicide, the Modern Day Casual Killing of Slaves. And in the previous segment, I had read an article about the late Elijah Mclean, was a 23-year-old young man who was viciously murdered. Come to find out, not only by the police had something to do with it, but also the fire department, because they had illegally administered a drug, which actually operated as a hallucinogen, an anesthesia and a hallucinogen, which did damage to the man because it was way more than the maximum amount required for his body weight. He was a very small framed man, a small man. He was a vegetarian. You see pictures of him. He wasn't big. He wasn't heavy. They overdosed him. And on top of that, he was put into an illegal chokehold. He ended up becoming brain dead. He suffered a heart attack. It's just a horrible story. So with that, in light of that, I want to jump to the article. I said I wrote this article back in July 29th of 2014. And this particular article was actually inspired by the death of Eric Garner, who also died from a chokehold. Okay. So when I read this article, okay, think about Elijah Mclean, because although I will be mentioning in this particular article that I wrote back in 2014, I will be mentioning about Eric Garner. The same thing applies to Elijah Mclean and so many others. It applies to George Floyd. It applies to Breonna Taylor. It applies to so many of our brothers and sisters who have died in the hands of the police. And this is a serious issue. It's just horrible. It's tragic. It's horrific. And it continues to happen. So I want you to listen, keenly listen in, and just check this aspect that is not being spoken about in terms of the law and why nationality is so important. And I keep drilling this. This is like one of the main reasons why I speak about this, because it is just, we have to stop this. We have to get back into a political status where we can address this and counter this. So I'll go ahead and read this. Is Justifiable Homicide the Modern Day Casual Killing of Slaves? And I put casual killing of slaves in parentheses. And I start off with a quote, okay? And the quote is, "It is not strange. There are no happenings. Law governs all events." And that quote is from a book entitled Holy Quran of the Moorish Science Temple of America. So it goes on as such. This article is Justifiable Homicide, the Modern Day Killing of Slaves, is dedicated to the memory of Eric Garner, Trayvon Martin, Oscar Grant, Sean Bell, Yvette Smith, and all of the other men and women who were unjustifiably murdered under the guise of, quote, justifiable homicide, unquote. Unfortunately, not a year goes by without a news report of some young man or woman dying in the hands of the police, or someone who acts as if they are the police. Usually, these cases are polarized by the factor of race. The victim is usually identified as Black or African American, while the perpetrator of the act is usually identified as white. Recently, we were exposed to the graphic viral video of a New York Police Department officer putting a 43-year-old asthmatic husband, father of 6 children, and grandfather of 2 children in a chokehold, which led to the man's death. The man's name is Eric Garner. The use of the chokehold to restrain someone has long been prohibited by the NYPD. Officer Daniel Pantaleo, the cop who used the chokehold on Eric Garner, was previously sued twice for using the exact same chokehold. Now, it stands to reason to ask the following question: why would the NYPD keep an officer who was sued twice for using a prohibited chokehold? The answer to that question, and the answer to why such killings continually take place, may lie in an old-time slave code. The oldest U.S. slave laws are found in the state of Virginia. There is a publication entitled The Statutes at Large, being a collection of all the laws of Virginia, Volume 2, in the year 1823 by William W. Henning. This publication contains the Virginia slave codes. Among these codes is a document dated October of 1669, which is entitled, quote, An Act About the Casual Killing of Slaves, end quote. And the act states the following. Here's the quote. Quote, whereas the only law enforced for the punishment of refractory servants resisting their master, mistress, or overseer cannot be inflicted upon Negroes, nor the obstinacy of many of them by other than violent means suppressed, be it enacted and declared by this grand assembly, if any slave resist his master or others by his master's order correcting him, and by the extremity of the correction should chance to die, that his death shall not be considered a felony, but the master or that other person appointed by the master to punish him be acquit from molestation, since it cannot be presumed that malice existed, which alone makes murder a felony, or that anything should induce a man to destroy his own estate, end quote. The relevance of this act becomes more apparent when one looks into the Supreme Court case of Tennessee versus Garner. Tennessee versus Garner, 471 U.S. 1, 1985. The year 1985. was a case in which the U.S. Supreme Court decided that under the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, when a law enforcement officer is pursuing a subject, the officer may apply deadly force to prevent escape if he or she has, quote, probable cause, unquote, to believe that the suspect poses a threat. Needless to say, it is very difficult to prove that a law enforcement officer does not have probable cause. In the case of Garner, a so-called black man who weighed about 400 pounds, one can guess how the NYPD might use this to their advantage. In criminal law, the idea of justifiable homicide exists between the legal definitions of an excuse and a justification. In law, homicide becomes justified when it prevents greater harm to others. A homicide can be justified if it can be proven that it was reasonable to believe that the victim posed an imminent threat to the life or well-being of another. A homicide in this case is blameless, and it is distinguished from the less strict criteria allowing deadly force in the Stand Your Ground law, which was used to justify the murder of Trayvon Martin by George Zimmerman. Unfortunately, in the United States, Asiatics of Moorish descent have been categorized under the labels that allude to slavery. That is, Negro, Black, Colored, African American, etc. As a result, they are still viewed as slaves. In this sense, the casual killing of slaves in the form of justifiable homicide applies. Those terms, which allude to slavery, were defined as objects of commercial trade in the law of nations. This definition carried over into the U.S. slave laws and later on into the various statutes that are in effect today. A slave is one who is void of a nationality, as nationality determines one's political status, and a slave has no political rights. The nationality of Moors was taken away from them in 1774, and the words Negro, Black, and Colored were given to Asiatics of America who were of Moorish descent. A perfect example of how nationality works is in the case of the lynchings of Italian Americans in New Orleans during the 1890s. As a result of the efforts of the Italian Council, the U.S. government actually paid indemnities for the killings. In this day and time, it is of utmost importance that we proclaim our nationality in order to reclaim our birthrights and be recognized as natural persons as opposed to state property. Prophet Wdrv taught us about the importance of nationality and birthrights. In his editorial entitled A Divine Warning by the Prophet for the Nations, he stated, quote, "The citizens of all free national governments according to their national constitution are all of one family bearing one free national name. Those who fail to recognize the free national name of their constitutional government are classed as undesirables and are subject to all inferior names and abuses and mistreatments that the citizens care to bestow upon them. And it is a sin for any group of people to violate the national constitutional laws of a free national government and cling to the names and the principles that allude to slavery," end quote. And that's the end of the article right there. So, again, when you put that into place and juxtapose that with the situation of Elijah Mclean, you see that it's really one and the same. One of the things I wanted to get into, which I thought was very interesting, is that in the particular act that's mentioned in the 1669 act that's entitled An Act About the Casual Killing of Slaves, it makes a point to state that basically, if this killing of the slave was for the purpose of quote unquote correction, right? Correction or punishment, it cannot be presumed that malice existed, right? So if you resist, and just keep in time, listen to the words of this. Listen. This is really something, and we definitely have to get into this. Now, check this out. When we get into the wording of that particular act, right? Like we said, resisting. When we look at the report, going back to that article with Elijah Mclean, who was murdered by the police and the fire department, remember they said, stop resisting. They kept finding in the investigation of the police department that they would just use excessive force, and they would use it by just saying, stop resisting. Basically saying that, they were justifying the excessive force, right? By the thought that the suspect was resisting, like the slave. If any slave resists his master or others his master's order correcting them, right, and they happen to die, the death is not a felony, because it cannot be presumed that malice existed. If you look at the definition, the legal definition, according to Black's Law Dictionary, of the word murder, it is the unlawful killing of a human being by another with malice aforethought, either express or implied. So that means they have to be malice in order for it to be murder. If there's no malice, then it's not considered murder, it's considered manslaughter, right? And the police got convicted of manslaughter, not murder, because they're saying that they didn't have malice in killing this man, even though they're admitting now that it was racially biased, but they didn't mean to kill him. It was just, they weren't resisting. He kept resisting, right? Justifiable homicide. It continues on and on. So this is very telling when we look at this. Just looking at that law, just observing that law and seeing what's going on in today's times with our people and the interactions with the police and these police killings, these deaths by way of police, then you see that this law really never went away. It's still in effect. So these are things we have to address in terms of that, and why the nationality is so important. But what I'm going to do, we are going to, in essence, conclude. We'll have a brief pause for the cause, but when we get back, we will continue our discussion. You are tuned in to WDRB Media, the only station giving you double the information and inspiration. Don't go anywhere, because we will be right back after the break.
If you want to educate, empower, and inspire our community, we're providing a wonderful opportunity for anyone who feels they can make a positive impact in the lives of others by applying to be an on-air radio personality. To set up an interview, call 877-342-7770. That's 877-342-7770 to apply. This is your chance to step out on faith. This is your chance to get the experience and education that you need in order order to launch to the next level of greatness and make a significant difference. WDRB Media is now hiring on-air radio personalities. If this is you, no experience is required, no previous education needed. They do all the training. Call 877-342-7770 to set up your interview today.
Welcome back to WDRB Media, the voice of the community, and those streaming live through free TuneIn radio app and through iHeartRadio. You are listening to What is Your Nationality? And I'm your host, Shem L. I'm the author of several books, including How Many Days Are in the Circle, which you can purchase on my website, sheml.com. That's SHEM-EL.com. And if you're just tuning in, we are discussing the aspect of justifiable homicide. The title of this episode is Justifiable Homicide, the Modern Day Casual Killing of Slaves. And I was just reading my article that I wrote back in July 29th of 2014 by the same title, is Justifiable Homicide, the Modern Day Killing of Slaves. And basically, in essence, I just want to let you all know that it is. You know, the short answer to that is yes, it is. And in conclusion, I just want to go back to the importance of nationality, because I always want to tie this up to the importance of nationality. Those of us who have been historically labeled with the terms of Negro, Black, Colored, African American, etc., we have been categorized under labels that delude to slavery. All of those labels that I name and much more delude to slavery. History and law makes that clear. Okay. These titles delude to slavery. These labels were given to us by slaveholders for the purpose of taking the nationality away from us, because nationality determines political status. It ties you to a nation. It ties you to a government. And according to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, every person has a right to a nationality. You have a right to a nationality. So that's a human right. So basically, in essence, taking away your nationality is basically taking away your human rights. You're no longer looked at as a full person in law. Notice I didn't say human. I said a person, because that's a legal term, because a full person has all the rights prescribed to them. And nationality is a part of that. So those terms which delude to slavery, as I mentioned in the article, were defined as objects of commercial trade in the law of nations. So you become property. Property has no rights. Definitely, according to Dred Scott case, it definitely has no rights that a so-called white man is bound to respect. So this definition carried over into the U.S. slave laws, and it later on carried on into the statutes that exist to this day. Okay? So a slave is one who is void of a nationality.